In the previous videos, I have told that lecturing has been heavily criticized by many researchers and also by many practitioners. And one of the questions that, which has been emphasized in the criticism is that lecturing is related to very passive type of learning. And that's clear. If we look at a lecture hall, there's an active teacher talking, and then the students are seemingly very passive when they are listening what the lecturer is telling. And we can also, or many people have also criticized lecturing that students only uncritically take in the information presented by the lecturer. And so theoretically they have claimed that the very idea of lecturing is based on a passive idea of learning. For example, they have referred to the behavioristic theoretical tradition. However, it is not at all a simple question how lecturing is related to the different modes of learning or theories of learning. First of all, it's important to emphasize that learning is not a kind of simple concept, only describing one particular type of processes taking place in human minds. Learning is very complex. It takes place on many levels, and the different theories also describe the learning taking place in different levels. But in order to answer the question how lecturing is related to different approaches or modes of learning, we have to shortly describe some basic approaches to learning. And here I describe shortly the passive mind models, and then active mind models, and the so-called social mind approach to learning. So, as already has been mentioned, many of the people who have criticized lecturing have emphasized that it's related to passive type of learning. And what passive type of learning could be? There is indeed a learning mechanism which is a kind of very important learning mechanism, which is in which the mind is not actively interpreting the environment or not intentionally interpreting the environment, but learning is more or less based on the input coming from outside. Already in the philosophical tradition, the concept of tabula rasa or blank slate described this kind of model that the mind is at first empty, and then the experience is directly writing into that blank slate. And according to this idea, the way how we learn information is not related to that information we already have or that knowledge we already have. So it's completely the external experience which is directly adding elements in human mind, or as they describe it in the more modern theories, it's restructuring neural networks. There are many examples of this kind of learning. Of course, because it's taking place all the time, it has to be very important learning mechanism. Many of our simple behavioral habits are learned in this way, but also the way how we learn to use language is very much based on this unconscious learning process. For example, the learning of intonation. When we are learning our mother tongue, we are interacting our natural environment. We learn that kind of intonation which is typical for that environment. and also the pronunciation of words. And we clearly notice that when we are studying a foreign language. For example, now my terrible Finnish intonation is something which I cannot get rid on easily, so that it's also when I try to speak English. So it's, but I have never consciously learned that. It's based on this kind of unconscious learning process. This kind of learning process is basically very atomistic, so that it is adding separate elements or separate habits in our mind. There are some mechanisms, well-known mechanisms, how there will be some connections with the elements which are based on the similarity or simultaneous appearance. But basically there is no strong structure in that kind of knowledge which is learned on the basis of that simple mechanism. So even though this unconscious learning is taking place practically always, it is difficult to see what would be the specific connection of that type of learning to lecturing. It is clear that lecturing has totally different aims, and is dealing with learning on a different level than this unconscious passive mind type learning mechanism is describing. So what kind of alternative we would have to explain this more conceptual learning processes typical for university studies, for example? Then we have to move in the models which we could call active learning model. And this active learning model is always based on the existing knowledge structures we already have when we are approaching the learning materials. And this is the learner is in this model actively interpreting the new situation. Is it a learning material, written learning material, or teaches verbal expressions by activating the existing knowledge structures and then using these knowledge structures in interpreting the content of the material. And based on this active interpretation, then the learner, so that this is kind of interactive relationship between existing knowledge structures and the external material. And based on this active interpretation, then the learner can add elements in the existing knowledge structures in a meaningful way, so that these new elements are not independent, but the way how it is related to existing knowledge structures gives a meaning for the new knowledge. And then again, after the knowledge structures have been enriched, then it opens new opportunities to interpret the environment on the new material, on the upper level. And based on this new interpretation, then it is possible to again enrich the knowledge structures, or in many situations the existing knowledge structures are not enough, and based on the accumulated learning experiences, then the learner has to restructure, in a more radical way, restructure the existing knowledge structures so that they can better understand, for example, the scientific concepts they are studying. It is clear that this is something which is very close to the aims we have in university teaching in general, and also when we are lecturing about the new theoretical ideas or research approaches and so on. We hope that students not only enrich add some individual elements in their knowledge, but also more deeply restructure the way how they see world. Okay, but that's the individual way to look learning. But if you think university teaching, it's not, or at least if you think the long-term learning in the universities, it's not only about the enrichment of individual knowledge structures. It is much more. And the socio-cultural approaches describe learning from another point of view. And this is not only describing what is taking place in a human mind, but is mainly focusing on the new type of participation in knowledge cultures and expert cultures. We can describe it with this model that in the before learning, the learner is kind of outsider, is not included in the knowledge culture, but then when the learning starts, then the learner becomes a peripheral member of that culture. But it means that the culture in a way accepts the newcomer and start helping him or her in the learning process. This already requires some basic knowledge, and then the environment, the culture is supporting the learning process by offering social network contacts, by offering rights to do things which were not possible before this new position as a member of the culture, and also a lot of cognitive resources which are needed in order to understand that type of thinking, this type of practices which are related to that knowledge culture. In the university studies, that's clearly it's easier to understand in those areas which are clearly related to some professional areas, for example in medical education, engineering, teaching, and so on. And then gradually during the studies and closer to graduation, then the learning means that the person becomes kind of a full member of that knowledge culture, which of course means that individual level they have a rich knowledge-based, a lot of skills, but on the same time they have rich network connections, all kind of cognitive tools typical for that knowledge culture, and rights to do many things. That's very clear, for example, if we think the example of medical studies, when first year medical study student gradually becomes a qualified medical doctor. It's not only something which happens in an individual mind, but it also happens in that person's position in the society, and that's culture. So lecturing can also be part, or in fact is very important part of this kind of development. So because by lecturing, the experienced specialist in the field already introduce the field and invite the newcomers to become members of this knowledge culture. It also has more kind of implicit functions by sharing the values of that knowledge culture and so on. So as we can have seen, lecturing is in a very complex way related to our theories of learning. But how then it is possible that individual learners can create a meaningful interpretation of the content of lecturing is another complex story, and in the next video we are describing that.